They had conquered thousands of worlds. The Krylaxians were one of the most feared empires in the galaxy. Their technology was advanced, their strategy flawless, and their cruelty unmatched. For millennia, they had dominated entire civilizations, bending them to their will with a simple, universal truth. All beings feared death. That fear was their weapon, their control mechanism. When they arrived on a new planet, they would show their overwhelming strength, make their enemies tremble, and offer them a choice: surrender or die. No species had ever chosen the latter. None, until they encountered humans. It was supposed to be another easy conquest. Earth, a small blue planet on the edge of the galaxy, rich in resources but technologically primitive by Krylaxian standards. Their ships descended from the sky like dark omens, massive and indestructible, blotting out the sun. The invasion began like all the others, swift, brutal, and utterly merciless. They expected Earth to crumble in days, if not hours, but things didn't go as planned. The humans didn't react the way they were supposed to. The Krylaxians had watched them, studied their history of wars and conflicts, and assumed they were just as fragile as the others. Sure, humans were violent, unpredictable even, but when faced with true annihilation, they would break like all the rest. Except they didn't. When the Krylaxians first landed in the cities, they unleashed their advanced weaponry. Energy beams that disintegrated anything in their path. Massive war machines that crushed buildings and tanks alike. The humans were outgunned and outnumbered. The Krylaxian commanders thought it was only a matter of time before Earth's leaders offered their surrender. Instead, they fought back, hard, fiercely. The resistance was immediate and widespread. Human soldiers, rebels, even civilians rose up. But it wasn't just the fact that they fought, it was how they fought, with a reckless, almost insane abandon. Reports from Krylaxian field commanders started flooding in. Human soldiers were not retreating when they should have. They didn't cower when faced with overwhelming odds. And in some cases, they didn't even try to save themselves. They would charge headfirst into battle, knowing full well they were going to die, and doing it anyway. And what was most chilling was that some of them smiled as they did it. At first, the Krylaxians thought it was desperation, a primitive species making one last, futile stand. But as more reports came in, a chilling realization spread through their ranks. This wasn't desperation. It wasn't madness. It was something else entirely. The humans, these fragile, short-lived creatures, had somehow evolved beyond the fear of death. And that terrified the Krylaxians more than any weapon ever could. This wasn't just happening in one battle. It was everywhere. Across the globe, humans were fighting with the same terrifying resolve. The Krylaxians, who had built their entire empire on the fear of death, didn't know how to respond. They were used to terrorizing their enemies into submission, breaking their will with the threat of total destruction. But the humans didn't seem to care. One by one, their commanders started asking the same question. What motivates a species that has no fear of death? They tried escalating their tactics. Mass executions of human prisoners, targeting civilian populations. They razed entire cities to the ground. But all this did was fuel the human resistance even further. Instead of breaking, the humans became more organized, more determined. The turning point came when a Krylaxian officer, after a devastating battle in the desert, captured a human soldier. The officer was curious. How could they fight like this? What drove them to such recklessness? He asked the soldier why humans threw themselves into battles they couldn't possibly win, why they fought when they were clearly doomed. The soldier, bloodied and exhausted, just looked up and laughed. A low, bitter laugh. "You think we're afraid of death?" he said. "We've been living with it our whole lives. It's not death we fear, it's wasting our lives." The Krylaxian officer was stunned. Humans didn't fight to avoid death. They fought because they accepted it. They knew it was inevitable, so they made sure that every moment they were alive had meaning. They fought not because they were trying to survive. They fought to leave something behind, to make sure that, even if they died, their fight lived on. That was the secret. That was what made humans so dangerous. The Krylaxians were horrified. The more they pushed, the more they realized that they had made a grave mistake. Every other species they had conquered fought to avoid death. But humans? They fought because they knew death was coming, and they had made peace with it long ago. The Krylaxians tried one last tactic. They launched an all-out assault on the human capital, hoping to crush the remaining resistance once and for all. They threw everything they had at the humans: ships, soldiers, weapons of mass destruction. But when they arrived, they didn't find a broken species. They found an army. Soldiers, civilians, children. Everyone was fighting. Human forces were small, scattered, and outnumbered. But they fought with an intensity, a fury, that the Krylaxians couldn't comprehend. They fought not for survival but for legacy, for meaning, for the future of their species, even if that future didn't include them. The Krylaxians were no longer the hunters, they were the prey. Human soldiers would lay traps, ambushing Krylaxian patrols in narrow alleys, sacrificing themselves to take out as many enemies as possible. Civilians armed with makeshift explosives would attack Krylaxian supply lines, blowing themselves up alongside the invaders. Entire cities became war zones, where every human was a potential fighter, and no one was afraid of dying. The Krylaxians had never experienced anything like it. Their soldiers, once confident in their superiority, began to falter. Fear spread through their ranks, not the fear of death, but the fear of fighting an enemy that didn't fear death, an enemy that seemed to grow stronger the more they were pushed to the brink. Finally, after months of brutal fighting, the Krylaxians did something they had never done before. They retreated. They left Earth in defeat, not because they were outmatched in technology or firepower, but because they had encountered a species that fought for something far beyond survival. They realized that humans had evolved something far more dangerous than any weapon or strategy. They had evolved the ability to fight without fear, to stare death in the face and charge forward anyway. They had learned how to win wars not with brute force, but with the one thing the Krylaxians couldn't understand: courage in the face of inevitable death. As the Krylaxian fleet fled the planet, the humans stood victorious, not because they had better technology, or more soldiers, or even more skill, but because they had the one thing the Krylaxians could never defeat: the unshakable, terrifying truth that death isn't the end. For the humans, the end was meaningless. The fight, that's what mattered. And in that, they had already won.